Hey there. Today I want to give you an update about that crazy bylaw in Calgary that bans protests near libraries and recreation centers, but only if it's about a topic the government doesn't like. Other types of protests can still take place. It's an unconstitutional bylaw that the city has the city government picking and choosing what topics the people of Calgary are allowed to protest. And if you break the law and protest something that the city doesn't like, it can cost you a fine up to $10,000 and even a jail sentence up to 1 year. This bylaw is crazy, and the update I have for you today is that we have filed an application for judicial review challenging that bylaw. I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I'm the Litigation Director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. Also, please remember that nothing in my videos is legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So let's talk about our challenge to this Calgary bylaw. We filed our notice of application on Friday, May 12th, and we have retained an incredible lawyer. His name is Yoav Niv. Yoav is an experienced criminal defense lawyer, and he's worked on a number of really high-profile cases, some which you may be familiar with. He has represented some of the protesters from Coots. He has represented the owner of the Whistle Stop Cafe in Alberta. He has been involved in many criminal defense cases, and he also works with a Canadian nonprofit called Families Against Violent Extremism, which is working on the repatriation of Canadian children who are being held in detention camps in northeast Syria. He is a really impressive lawyer, and we are so fortunate to have him working with us on this case. So as I said in a previous video, which I will link to above, the new Calgary bylaw passed in mid-March. The bylaw only restricts certain types of protests, which they define as specified protests. And those are protests that express objection or disapproval towards ideas or actions related to race, religion, color, gender, gender identity, gender expression, physical or mental disability, age, ancestry, place of origin, marital status, source of income, family status, or sexual orientation. So the bylaw bans those types of protests on publicly accessible property within 100 meters of an entrance to a library or rec center. The bylaw is not what we call content neutral. It picks and chooses among different types of content, and some types of content, some words, some expression is prohibited and some is permitted. So you could have a climate extinction protest beside a library, but you can't protest if it relates to one of these forbidden topics. Now, the reason the bylaw was created, I've also covered in another video, it was because the city was upset about a specific type of protest. They were upset about really rowdy protests against something called Drag Queen Story Hour, which is a public event held for children at libraries around the world where drag queens read books to kids. These events resulted in really disruptive protests by protesters who didn't like them, who think drag is not an appropriate art form for children, as well as by counter-protesters who wanted to support these events continuing and show support for the LGBTQ community. Now, I am not especially interested in the drag story hour issue. The topic, yes, is a current cultural flashpoint. It's very messy. It's being worked out between opposing voices, but I don't really have my own strong views about whether these events are a good or bad idea. I'm actually pretty open-minded about that topic either way. I guess I can sort of see why people like the events. I personally like drag shows. I have watched every season of RuPaul's Drag Race. I went to the live show, but I also can see why people might say, hey, I don't like this. It's not child friendly, because I've watched enough drag shows to know a lot of them are not child friendly. A lot of them are really raunchy. But I don't know enough about these particular events to say what I think, because hey, maybe they are totally benign and wholesome. I really don't know, but I can sort of see both sides. Maybe that is not a popular thing to say, but I tell it to you guys how I see it. And the way I see it is that this bylaw, the problem with it isn't drag story hour at all, because Calgarians have a right to protest drag story hour if they want to, no matter what I think, no matter what the government thinks. And Calgarians actually have a right to protest any topic they choose. And that is a right that is protected by our charter. It is not for the government to tell Canadians what they may or may not protest. And to the extent that there is a debate about whether drag story hour should happen or shouldn't, that is actually an important public debate. And now that debate has been silenced. It's relegated the debate to this government-approved corner. And it's also relegated a lot of other important conversations to the corner. As I said in a previous video, the bylaw is going to have a lot of unforeseen consequences and silence a lot of other speech. I gave some examples in the previous video. Things like child marriage as a religious practice would fall under this bylaw, a protest about that, a protest about medical assistance in dying or drug decriminalization could be captured by this bylaw because that relates to physical and mental disability. International armed conflict protests and protests about female genital mutilation as a religious practice would all be captured by this bylaw. But Calgary City Council closed its eyes to these potential unforeseen consequences and enacted this bylaw, which can be used to silence speech that many councillors might actually agree with, including the speech of counter-protesters. We are fighting back against this bylaw because courts have long held that the right to freedom of expression is content neutral and the government doesn't get to pick and choose between topics. The content of the expression, no matter how offensive or unpopular or disturbing it is, does not deprive it of its Section 2B Charter protection. The Calgary bylaw violates core democratic rights to freedom of expression, but also freedom of association and freedom of assembly that are also guaranteed by the Charter. It also violates the right to liberty guaranteed in Section 7 of the Charter because it comes with a term of imprisonment of up to 1 year. Now, libraries are places of learning, of debate, of discovery, and recreation centers and libraries both can and do quite literally play host to political debates during elections. And the effect of this bylaw is to silence debate around places where debate is actually designed to happen. Under the bylaw, the government would permit a pipeline protest or a labor protest or a tax protest, but not a protest about female genital mutilation as a religious practice or medical assistance in dying or international armed conflict. But the bylaw is actually going to silence more speech than even just the speech captured by the bylaw. It will chill other speech that doesn't fall in it because people in the public may fear that whatever the topic, it could attract state sanction due to uncertainty in how the bylaw will be applied or enforced. So in our view, the bylaw must be struck down, and that's why we are fighting it. Now, we are bringing this challenge as a public interest litigant, so that means we are bringing the challenge as an organization, although we also have what's called private standing because we are an organization headquartered in Calgary, and the bylaw is a law of general application, so it could apply to us as well. The city has actually done an update report about how the bylaw has been used in the last month, and they disclosed that there have been 6 tickets that have been issued under the bylaw. It isn't clear to me if those 6 tickets are for 6 different people or if a few people were ticketed a bunch of different times. But if you do know who has been ticketed, leave their information, their name, or a news article about them in the comments below because I'm interested to see if they're going to be pursuing a challenge as well. The city has said that so far no counter-protesters have been ticketed, but that doesn't mean that counter-protesters couldn't be ticketed. The bylaw certainly could apply to them. And this issue about counter-protesters actually came up in council when the bylaw was voted on. The city report also found that the number of specified protests had declined. They found that since the bylaw was enacted, there had been 1 protest per week instead of 3 per week. Yeah, if you make something illegal with a massive penalty, including jail time, you're probably going to scare people and get less of that activity. It doesn't mean that the bylaw is legal and that that activity isn't protected by the charter. So the fact that they got slightly less protesting because they made protesting illegal doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. If you want to tell me what you think of the protest ban and tell me what your story or experience has been, you can sign up to tell me that story at the ccf.ca/Calgary protest ban. You can also support the costs associated with this case by making a tax-deductible charitable donation at the ccf.ca/donate. This case is going to cost us about $50,000, and we really need your help with resources to fund this case. If you can make a donation, that would be so helpful. I would be so grateful. If you can't, I do get it, but you can still help by sharing this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.